Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining me from today. I hope you're all enjoying the conference so far. I was able to check out some really awesome presentations yesterday, and I'm super excited to be presenting alongside some really awesome women today. So I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully, there we go. So my name is Kristi Perreault. I'm a senior software engineer at Liberty Mutual Insurance. Today we are going to be talking about Squeaky clean code, how to adopt better coding practices. So I have a quick agenda to kick us off. I'm going to start by introducing myself. We're going to talk a little bit about my company, Liberty Mutual. I will define exactly what is clean code, and probably more importantly, what clean code is not. We're going to talk about some team coding standards and how to properly set up your environment. Then we will move into everybody's favorite topic, documentation. We'll talk a little bit about how to learn from code reviews. And finally, I'll finish up with some success stories that I've had from following these guidelines. A little bit about Liberty Mutual Insurance. So our purpose is to help people embrace today and confidently pursue tomorrow. And we do this by promising protection for the unexpected delivered with care. I have some really quick, fast facts for you here on the right. So we have nearly 45,000 employees spread across 29 different countries and economies across the globe. About 5,000 of these employees are actually in technology. We are the 6th largest global property and casualty insurer, and we rank number 71 on the Fortune 100 list. This year, Insider Pro and Computer World has voted us one of the top 100 best places to work in IT. Additionally, Forbes has ranked us as the best employers for diversity, for new grads, and for women this year. We are also one of the best places to work for LGBTQ equality, and we have scored a perfect 100 in the 2018, 2019, and 2020 Corporate Equality Index. Since this is a Women Who Code conference, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the work that we do for supporting women in technology through our Women in Tech org. The first here is our LEGIT group, and this actually stands for Liberty Encouraging Girls in Technology. We've been around for about 6 years now, and our goal is to teach simple coding and inspire girls to pursue the STEM disciplines. As of last year, we actually have over 350 Liberty employees volunteering to teach over 12,000 students. This is actually a cause that's pretty near and dear to my heart. I've been pretty actively involved in a leadership role for the last 3 years in our LEGIT org, and I'm happy to say that we're still going strong over the pandemic and have been transitioning some events to be virtual, which has been great. The second one here is the WIT Summit Mentorship. So we have a summit mentorship for students that are freshmen and sophomore women in college, and we have roughly 65 members of the Women in Tech org volunteer to mentor them throughout their school years. And this usually leads to them joining our internship program and eventually as new hires here as well. So if you would like to learn more information, or if you're in the market for a new job, definitely check us out at lmi.co/tech, or feel free to reach out to me after the presentation. A little bit about me. So my name is Kristi. I'm a senior software engineer at Liberty Mutual. I work on our serverless and enablement and development team. I've been with Liberty for my entire professional career, which has been about 4 years plus a 1-year internship. I have an undergraduate degree in in computer engineering, and I just received my master's degree in electrical and computer engineering with focuses on data analytics and cloud computing from Boston University this past January, which I accomplished while working full-time during the pandemic. I currently reside in Boulder, Colorado, where I work permanently remote, though I am East Coast born and raised. I hike, I ski, I bike, anything and everything outdoors. So I've definitely embraced the Colorado lifestyle. I'm also affiliated with the Women Who Code Denver and Boulder chapter out here, and I will be giving a condensed, a little bit more informal version of this presentation at our next monthly meetup on December 6th. So let's jump into it. Clean code is defined as code that is easy to understand, easy to change, and follows good standards. And this is a definition from Robert C. Martin's Clean Code Handbook. If you read the blurb on my talk, you'll notice that I kind of call out some of these things and say, well, what does it mean to be easy to understand? What does it mean for code to be easy to change? And what do good standards actually look like? So I'm going to attempt to answer some of these questions here, and this is by no means an exhaustive list as to what clean code is or is not. So first of all, clean code kind of answers the big what, how, and why questions. So what exactly are you writing? What exactly does this method do? What exactly is the purpose of your methods or your logic or your variables? How do your objects interact with each other? How is your code written? Why did you write the code the way you did? So these are some just high-level questions that your code should pretty much intuitively answer, maybe with a little help from documentation, but it should be clear what this is answering. Clean code is also refactorable. So as developers, we know that technology is ever evolving, ever changing. There's new things being released every day. Is your code able to handle that? So are you able to go back through and update dependencies as needed, or even for programming languages? Not always going to be the easiest thing, but hopefully if your code is clean, it'll make this process a little easier. Additionally, is your code maintainable? And not just by you, but from other members of your team, and also for folks that might inherit your project someday. So you're able to do day-to-day maintenance on this. Are you able to add features pretty easily, identify bugs, so on and so forth? The next one is one that probably everybody thinks of when they think of clean code, which is it formatted and readable? I will be the first to say I do not care if you use tabs over spaces, but pick one and stick with it throughout your code. It's going to make things much more consistent and much easier to read. Additionally, some other things to think about is to keep your methods small and concise, very clear, and try not to get files that are thousands and thousands of lines long. That's definitely not going to be something that is very readable. And finally, is your code easy to test? Hopefully, if you have unit tests, they are easy to understand and easy to add to. And if you don't, hopefully you can add them pretty easily. In addition, I would say it should be easy to test this manually across multiple different environments as well. So I think probably what's more important is what clean code is not. So clean code is not just commenting everything. Intuitive code should not need comments. So you shouldn't be just going in there and adding things thinking it'll make it more readable or more understandable. Because the reality of it is you're not going to make it more refactorable, easy to maintain, easy to test. Similarly, it's not just making your code look nice. So yes, you have it nice and consistent with your tabs or spaces, but just making it look nice is also not going to make it easy to test, easy to maintain, easy to refactor, and all of these other things we just went through on the left. And finally, I do want to call out that this is not the one right way to code. There's no like kind of golden standard when it comes to this. Today, I want to share with you just some of the tips and tricks, the philosophies that we follow on my team that has led to some really great success. And I think these are great guidelines, but I just want you to keep in mind that some of this is flexible depending on your team, what languages you're using, and just kind of take what resonates with you today. Before we even get to any code, we're going to talk about team coding standards. So this is a document that your team agrees on and sets for your code. If you are familiar with Agile, this is not a team working agreement. So a team working agreement defines your Agile processes and ceremonies and exactly how you want to work as a team, write stories, and story point. A team coding standards document is very specific to your development team and how you want to handle your code. This should be a living document that you're revisiting fairly often. Some quick examples of when to revisit would be if you get a new team member, if you have a new team member leave, if your team restructures, or if you add new projects or code bases. Otherwise, I would say just try to revisit it in your retros as much as you can, because this is a living document and you want to stay up to date on the latest tools and technologies. I put together a sample team coding standards with some high-level topics that our team likes to include in our coding standards. So the first would be a recommended tool set. This is where you call out your high-level languages you want to use and possibly specific IDEs you might want to associate with that. For example, if we use Java, we prefer IntelliJ. If we use Python, we like to use VS Code or PyCharm. Next is the branching strategy. This might be a pretty short section. We like to do a feature branch to develop to main. If you're a smaller team, maybe you just want to do develop to main, or maybe you have specific branching strategies across your code repositories. I'd also include like a quick description of how you want to approach naming your feature branches. Your testing strategy is also important here. So this is how you call out how you want to write your unit tests and how you're going to manually test. So again, for example, if you're using Java, do you want to use JUnit 5? If you're in Python, do you want to preference maybe doing some parameterized tests? So just some examples and common test cases. So if you have a couple projects that are pretty closely related or doing similar things, maybe you're using the same test cases across all of them, you're going to want to document them here in this document. Kind of along with the recommended tool set are your language specific guides. So this is where you call out more granularly exactly what versioning you want to use for your languages and style guides. I know standard JS is a pretty popular one for JavaScript. We've also used the Google styling guide in the past. So there's definitely some options here, and pick what suits your team best and just make sure you're documenting it here. And also your doc strings and your comment blocks, depending on what language you're in, you might call these something different. But kind of just a quick template of what that might look like, usually an overview, your arguments, your returns. I also have included a code review policy and a README outline on here. However, we are going to go into both of those things a little bit more in depth later on. So once you have your coding standards, you're going to want to do your environment setup, which is arguably the hardest part about being a developer. I would highly recommend, especially the first time going through this, that you do this as a team. You're going to be much more consistent across all your environments. In the past, I've done this with one developer sharing their screen, walking through the IDE, setting up all the formatting you want, setting up all those plugins, downloading everything, and having everyone else follow along on their own machines. So you're all kind of doing this together, and you know that everyone is going to be the same across the board. You don't have to, but I would highly recommend sticking to the same tools. It's going to keep things consistent, and it's going to make it really easy when somebody runs into an issue and you're helping another member troubleshoot something, because you'll all be on the same baseline. That being said, if you have some tools that you're really particular about that you really want to stick with, or have team members the same way, you don't have to do this. You can definitely be flexible, but I would recommend trying it out. If you have not heard about live code sharing, this is a pretty cool feature that I would definitely recommend you look into. VS Code does a pretty good one. It's kind of like sharing in a Google Doc, except you can work together in a code editor. So if you use like VS Code Live, you can start a live code sharing session, send the link out to the other members of your team, and you can all work in the same code base together, which is awesome for pairing and mobbing, especially if you're like me and you work virtually and from home. So definitely look into that if that's something that your team might want to utilize and set it up in your environment. And finally, make sure you're following your code standards here. Again, this is a living document, so if you're going through the environment setup and something is not applicable or you want to change something, feel free to do so. Just make sure it's consistent in both places. All right, I know everybody's super excited to talk about documentation. It is super important though, and I do want to start at the absolute lowest level, which would be comments in your code. So I'd highly recommend following a standard method level or definition level comment block. You'll want to use these when there's really heavy logic or you need to clarify what's going on in one of your methods or your definitions. This is usually going to happen in your service layer, your API, your controller. That being said, again, I'll say intuitive code should not need a ton of comments. So if you have some smaller helper methods or utility methods that are pretty explicitly named, it's pretty obvious what they're doing, you shouldn't need to comment those. I would say, line comments can be useful here and there as well too. Maybe if you're trying to group some different API or method calls together, or trying to clarify a name of a variable or something along those lines. Just use your discretion when you do this. If you have more lines of code, if you have more lines of comments than you actually have lines of code, then that's probably a sign you have way too many comments in there. Readmes, on the other hand, you should always, always, always include a README in your project, one at the root level. And then if you need to, you can definitely include some throughout different levels of your project, depending on how large it is and what information you want to convey. I kind of want you to think about this as like your home base. So this is going to be the place where you go, your team goes, other folks contributing to your code, possibly folks on the business end, users of your application. They're going to want to see a lot of the information and everything that you have to share about this code base. I'd recommend that you follow a standard template, which I'm also going to walk through on the next slide. And this also makes your life so much easier as a developer, because then you can just copy and paste it and reuse it throughout all your projects and just change it to be the project specific information. You also want to include links out to other resources as needed. So if you have some external documentation, which I'll get into, or other resources that might be connected to your project, definitely link them in your README. So this is a sample template that I've kind of put together. My team likes to follow this. The first thing would be to put the project name right at the top. And right below that, list out your badges. So this will give you the status of maybe your pull requests and your build and deploys for your different branches and environments. You should have an overview section. That'll give you a high-level description of the project. Depending on how big your project is and what you're doing in it, this could be 1 to 2 sentences, or it could be several paragraphs. I would also recommend possibly having a key resources subsection here. Like I said, I work in the serverless space, so we do a lot with cloud resources, so we like to call those out here. This could be anything from storage, databases, compute resources. I would just list out the name of the resource, what type of resource it is, and just a one-liner about what it's doing. Probably the most important part of your README template, if you have nothing else, please make sure you have instructions on how to build and run your project locally. And I would start with your required installs and view this like you are brand new and have never ever set up your environment. What does somebody need to get started with this? What language are they using? What version? What CLI tools? Probably dependency managers as well. Are you using NPM or Yarn? Anything you need to get this building and running locally, list it here, and also link out to those downloads and installs. It's going to save everybody a lot of headaches and frustrations in the future. And then explicitly say exactly how to build and run this project. Copy and paste your exact commands. Again, it's going to make it easier on everybody else. And I promise you, even if you think you're the only one working in here, you're going to walk away from it for a week or two and come back and forget exactly how you did it. So it's going to save you as well. Kind of similarly, you're going to do the same thing with the tests. So you want to list out your steps for how to run your unit tests. Again, include any maybe test-specific dependencies. You could call out how to run your test suite altogether. Maybe there's a way to run tests individually you want to list out. Some of that is good to include here. And also how to test manually, which goes hand in hand with this endpoint documentation piece. So typically, you're probably going to be building out maybe a UI, an API. It's probably going to have some endpoints you want to reach out to. List exactly what your request looks like and what you're expecting back from your response body. In some cases, we actually even take screenshots of like Postman or Insomnia to show exactly what the endpoint looks like and how to hit it and how to configure it. Additionally, if you have some extra security around this, like retrieving tokens or some authorization, you can document that here as well, how to get it, not the actual authorization. So I would link out to documentation for that. And finally, we just have a one-line contributors section where we list members of our team and we link out to our team page. And this is great for folks that end up having any questions or anything as they're going through this. And finally, we have some external documentation. This is not always necessary. It could be the form of like a wiki page or a Git book, something along those lines. If you need more information, if you're finding that the README is getting really out of hand and you want to take it into another space, you can definitely do that. Some other examples would be possibly including a well-architected review, maybe some cybersecurity threat models or context diagrams, architecture diagrams, anything visual that you might not want to include right in the README. Just make sure you're linking all your resources. There's nothing more frustrating than having all this great documentation and having it scattered everywhere so people can't find it and consume it easily. So again, use your README as kind of like your landing spot and make sure everything is connected to that today. Code reviews. So this is probably my favorite section. And if you take one thing away from this talk, it should be that code reviews are an awesome way to learn. No matter what level of your career that you're at, this has been a great learning tool. So I'd say for everyone, it's great to go in and ask questions and have discussions on your pull requests. If you're a more junior or newer member to your team, this one might be a little controversial, but I really believe that no comment is too small or too silly. Don't be afraid to just be nitpicky. My team will tell you that I was probably the most frustrating person to work with for a while because all I did was call out typos and comments or extra lines, extra spaces. And it might have been a little bit of a pain, but honestly, it got me really used to commenting in the code. It got me kind of feeling like I was part of the team and like I was contributing. And sometimes when you're that early on, you just don't know what you don't know yet. So this is just a good way to get your foot in the door. And then over time, you start adding some more constructive comments. You ask more in-depth questions and you start to understand things a lot more. So if you have a junior developer on your team, try not to give them too much slack for that. Or if you are one, start doing this. Start getting used to just putting yourself out there a little bit more. If you open your pull request, it's kind of common on our team to actually go back through and comment on something and say, you know, I did this way, or explain just how or why you did something a certain way, especially if it's a little out of the norm, or maybe you're adding or trying out a new architecture or a new library. It gets you really in the zone of explaining how your thought process works, and it helps other members of your team understand how you're walking through something. And finally, we have a rule to just don't take things personally. We're all there to accomplish the same goal. We all want to produce great work, and we all want to help each other learn and grow. If you have some comments on there that maybe are bothering you, or maybe they're starting to be taken the wrong way, take it out of the pull request and just hop on a call and talk about it. It's so much easier to talk those things through sometimes. And usually sometimes in text, it's hard to get things misconstrued or things get miscommunicated and they don't mean them that way. So just rule of thumb, try not to take things too personally. So I wanted to include some real samples from our pull requests. I had to comment out some personal information here. This first one is a real pull request. We had over 100 comments on this unit test refactor story. I'm sure some of you are seeing this and absolutely freaking out. Not all of our pull requests are like this. I want to make that pretty clear. This does happen every once in a while, and this was a little bit earlier on in my career and earlier on with our team. So there was a lot of questions. There was a lot of really good discussion happening. So don't be afraid of this. It does seem like that's a lot. But I knew exactly where this old pull request was and was able to dig it up pretty easily, and I remember it. So it is a learning tool. I'd say also don't be afraid to just use the pull requests as a good way to provide some compliments. It doesn't always have to be questions and constructive feedback. You could just say like, hey, I really like what you did here. I've also included just a couple, questions that I've asked before, or, like a humbling statement, like, yeah, I totally forgot you could do that. Okay, yeah, I'll add it to these files. Or even just a comment like, hey, I opened this PR. this section I haven't touched yet. I'll fill it out with an XPR. Don't worry about it. So just some ideas if you're kind of being stagnant in your pull requests, or you need some fresh ideas to get some conversation flowing in there. But of course, I want you to have some fun with it. We include memes in our pull requests every so often, so you're gonna see that one in there. Just kind of funny, keep it a little lighthearted. One of our developers wrote a nice story in the third person about him discovering the wonders of Java 8 back in 2019. I actually found this, and I dug through the pull request to find this, and it made me laugh. So definitely keep it light. I've added a little bit of sass sometimes when it comes to our test dummy data a little bit. So just enjoy it. If your team is not like this, don't worry about it. But I would highly recommend just kind of having some fun with some of your pull requests sometimes. We're human first, right? So it is just nice to laugh and break it up a little bit. So this works. I want to share some of our success stories and things that I've come across where this clean code has actually helped us out quite a bit. So first was a database application. Actually, a lot of the screenshots from those pull requests are from this project. We transitioned this probably about 2 years ago now, and we transitioned it off to a group of pretty non-traditional developers. So these were folks that are maybe DBAs or network admins or just don't really have a strong coding background. We had 1 2-hour meeting with them to transition a project space of probably 15 repositories. And we didn't hear from them since. And this is an active application that is still being built out today. It has a very loyal customer base. They're adding new features to it all the time. But literally, we talked to them for 2 hours and we were able to transition the entire project. And I don't think they've really followed up with us for anything. And I attribute a lot of that to just how well we documented our process, how well we documented how to build and run and test everything. They just have not had many questions for us. And for those of you that have inherited projects or passed them off, you know how relatively unheard of this is. On my current team, we allow for some internal open source collaboration. We've just gotten a lot of really positive feedback from this. We do kind of provide a little bit of a contribution guide for folks. And again, we're listing out how to build and run our projects, how to interact with them, how to work with us. So this has worked out really well. Folks feel very comfortable contributing with us. And we don't feel like it takes much of our time. It doesn't take much of their time, and they're able to get their features right away. So this has just been great, and some positive feedback, again, due to all our documentation and coding clean. And finally, our company runs a 24-hour internal hackathon, typically every year. A couple of years ago, a few members of my team and I created a team and joined. We were one of, I think, 40 or 50 teams. And we followed these clean code practices over the 24 hours, and we actually won the Tech Excellence Award for our team. So time is not your excuse, because we worked through this over 24 hours overnight, and we were still able to produce a pretty awesome product with all tests and documentation in place. So I know I've been talking for a while. I have one slide of bonus content for those of you who have managed to hang on with me for so long. Kind of get ahead of a little bit of the questions, and some of probably the one complaint that I hear about clean code is, hey, I'm on board with you, I agree, but we're too busy putting out fires. I don't know how we're going to prioritize this. My team's maybe not on board. My manager's not on board. I won't know how to prioritize this with my product owner, kind of the like. So the 3 big things that you're going to care about, that your company cares about, and are actually the 3 arguments for you are your time, your cost, and the security of it. So I've touched on time and cost a little bit. Yes, it is going to take some time up front to get your project situated, to create these templates, to follow these processes and procedures. However, the amount of time and money that you're saving up front is going to be significant, especially, like I said, with transitioning a project over. The fact that that only took us 2 hours of our time is really unheard of, and that saved a lot more time by having us do these things up front. Additionally, if you're coding clean, then it's going to be much easier to keep up with tech debt. And when that's the case, usually new dependencies or new libraries or new versions are coming out And they're fixing things and they're making things more secure. So if you're on top of your tech debt, your code is naturally going to be more secure and have less vulnerabilities. So just in summary, some kind of key takeaways from this. Try to create and follow a team coding standards document. Make sure your whole team agrees on it. Make sure you're revisiting it often and that you're setting up your environment appropriately. I know nobody likes to do it, but document everything as much as you can. Maybe not in the code, but definitely with your READMEs and external documentation. It's going to help a ton. Really use your code reviews to learn, no matter what level of your career you're in. This is a great place for everyone to come together and have some really great discussion. And finally, just enjoy. We all code because we like it and we enjoy doing what we do. So keep it fun and keep it light and definitely have a good time. So I just want to say a huge shout out to Matt and John. These guys have basically taught me everything that I know about coding clean and have been there learning alongside me this whole time. So I definitely would not be the developer that I am today without them. So you guys have been amazing. A huge shout out to Miranda, who has been my #1 cheerleader and my unofficial mentor for these past couple years. She is awesome. She has also presented with Women Who Code before, and she has helped me with reviewing my proposal and my presentation today as well. So thank you guys. Thank you to my current and previous teams and managers, friends and family. I know it's just me up here, but there's a whole army of people supporting me. And that's all I have for you today. So feel free to connect with me on Twitter. My email is also listed here, or add me on LinkedIn. It's just my full name. And with that, I think we can switch over to some questions.
That was awesome, Kristi, and got some really good tips from you. And who doesn't love memes, right?
Right, exactly.
So let's head over to our questions now. Okay, so the most asked one is, as a coding bootcamp student, how long does it typically take to complete an average coding process within a large company?
Sure. I think I'd probably ask what you mean by average coding process. If you mean like kind of like an end-to-end or like a feature. But I guess it really depends on what you're building out, what tools you're working with, and what your team looks like. I would say as a new student, I wouldn't put too much pressure on time that it takes either. Like sit back and are you learning things? Do you have the right mentors? Are you liking what you're doing too? I think that that's a huge part of it as well. The clean code, I always say too, you know, the coding is easy to teach somebody. I can teach anybody how to code and walk through it. Is the passion there? Are you excited about continuing with this? So yeah, I think it really depends on what team you're working on and what features you're building out. But don't get too hung up on the time and how long it takes you to get up to speed. I think everybody's different.
Okay, so our next question is, on coding standards, do you think those should be set by the company level, set at the company level or at the team level?
Oh, that's a good question. It would be kind of cool to have some company standards, maybe just blanket, overarching, very flexible ones. But really on your team is a great place to start because as I mentioned, you know, we have over 5,000 tech employees. We're all over different tech, different tools, different programming languages, different frameworks. So I think it would be really hard at a company my size to have one standard kind of code standards doc to set. However, making that something that is important or maybe pushing that as a priority to teams to have would be a great thing to do. And then you can get more granular at your team level as to exactly what is in there and what it looks like.
Okay. Oh, okay. So our next question is, what are badges? I think it's from the README documentation.
Oh, yeah. So those are just like, literally, they look like little a badge, I guess. It just tells you what the status of your open pull requests are. And you can set them up also for all your branches and your deploy environments. So it'll tell you if your branches are passing or failing, how many open pull requests you have. So they're just kind of some quick facts. And I actually believe too, they're linked. So if you click on them, you'll go straight to that last open thing or last ran thing.
Okay, so our next question is from Ashraf. I'm sorry if I'm incorrectly pronouncing your name. So if he feels always that he doesn't know enough to apply for a job, could you please give him any advice?
Yeah, I would definitely say go for it. If you know a little bit of one language, I think that you can definitely get in as an entry level employee. I actually do a lot of the technical interviewing at my company for entry level and for interns as well. And I'll tell you the biggest things that I look for aren't what you know. But it's how you can talk through your problems. And it's some of those more soft skills too. I like to work with folks and think like, hey, could I picture them working on my team with me and pairing with them? It doesn't, I really don't care too much about what languages you know or even how well you know them. We allow our code folks in our code interviews to Google things and to look stuff up as long as they're not copying and pasting. So I want to see, are you able to find the right solutions? Are you able to talk through your problems? How do you think through things? Do you have some examples where you've worked on teams? It's a little bit more about those soft skills and are you a good fit for our culture and our environment rather than your coding skills, honestly.
I hope that answers. And so our next question is from Noel. In my job, we mostly do pair programming. Do you still suggest doing code reviews with a pair programming?
Yes, I definitely would. I think there's some things that you catch even when you miss when you're pair programming. And it gives you time with the code yourself to go back through and look through it. And also if you're pairing, usually teams are bigger than two people. You're probably going to want input from other folks on your team. So I think that the more times you review and go through your code, the more robust you're going to make it, right? So it definitely doesn't hurt to review it a couple different times.
Awesome. And our next question is, are there any aspects of clean code as it is originally proposed by Robert Martin that have not worked for your team?
Oh, that is a good question. So I will confess I have not read his book cover to cover, but I have used a lot of the philosophies that have come from his book. There are some things, I think he might be a little Java specific, and we tend to do a lot of Python and a bit of TypeScript and JavaScript. So some things might not be completely applicable across all coding languages. There hasn't been one that I can think of off the top of my head that hasn't really worked for us. I know we've played around with some agile ceremonies before, but not quite in terms of code. We tend to try something and adopt it, and we'll retro on it every couple weeks and see how something's going, and then we iterate on that. So if it doesn't work out, or if we really like it, we keep it. But I can't think of anything specifically that we've tried and haven't not liked.
Next question is from Rachel. What is your suggestion for introducing new code patterns into an established code base in a successful way?
Sure. So I will say I've been a little spoiled and I have not had to inherit too many projects. We've been really lucky in the fact that we've been starting with fresh development a lot of times, which is awesome. And I recognize that that is totally not the norm in a lot of cases. I would say for introducing new code patterns, look at your existing code base, see what it fits in. If your existing code base isn't clean, maybe that's a good time to start kind of cleaning it up before you think about reintroducing something new. In some cases, you might even want to start fresh and kind of build that out based on the old code that you have. I know that for our team, we work a lot with like the AWS CDK, and they actually have only been around for a couple of years, and they recently just released best practices for working with CDK. So we were kind of on our own before that, and now we're looking at this saying like, oh, well, I guess we're going to have to go back and restructure all our projects. Honestly, we kind of save that for sometimes when it's a little bit quieter on our team. If we have some people that are on FTO, we kind of add that as like tech debt stories that we pick up when we can. Yeah, sometimes you do have to just kind of jump right in though and do the grunt work to make it look nicer or to update for your new technologies or new patterns.
Okay, so we have a second last question from Debbie. As a new grad SWE that's just starting out, do you have any tips for following your clean code guidelines?
Yeah, sure. So I would say if you're going through this and it's a little bit overwhelming, start small. I think honestly, maybe the code standards would be a good place to have, or to start having discussions on your team, or even for yourself if you're just doing personal projects. You can kind of type up a little bit of document to have for you to follow. I think the README outline is a really good place to start. That's going to be probably the quickest thing that's going to provide the most value right away, because you're documenting all your processes and the how to build, how to deploy, how to test. So if you can get a solid template stood up for that, that would be great. And then, like I said about the code reviews, just start small, start adding little things here and there, start enhancing comments or variable names or doing silly things. So definitely don't feel like you have to conquer the whole thing. And this is a team effort too. It's not just an individual.
Okay, so quickly, our last question. We're running out of time.
Yeah, sure.
So, what if you ask your new team and what their standards are from some of the things you mentioned and aren't specific standard in place? It's in the chat. Should I repeat? Cassie is saying,
yes.
what if you ask your new team what their coding standards are for some of the things you mentioned and aren't specific standard in place?
Yeah, so if you mean specific standards like on your team, or I don't know if you mean specific standards like in an actual like book or like written anywhere, I would kind of say just follow what you think is best practice and get lots of feedback. So like I said, we've been doing some open source collaboration and we get feedback from that. So what's working well, what isn't, or we see it from other teams around us, what works well, what doesn't, what can we maybe adopt to help our users and our customers.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kristi. And that's it for our Q&A session. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. And you guys can meet Kristi and me in the networking tab. Please go and have fun in it. And please check out on Expo tabs as well. We have a photo booth. So do share your pictures there. And Kristi, any ending thoughts?
Thank you guys so much for everything. It was super nice meeting you, and thanks for attending my talk.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.
Bye.